3, 2, 1. Oh, got to throw on the mics. Got to throw on the headphones. All right. So, Mr. Sean French.
Yes.
Thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So look, we've been connected forever. Have to go back years, probably, maybe even a decade to figure out where or how we got connected. But I wanted to talk to you today because you've been in LA in the content creation space for like 20 plus years. You got some stories.
I do. Yeah. So
we don't have to start with your best story right away, but we can take it back. So where were you born originally?
So SoCal native. I was born in Pasadena, but raised in Park City, Utah. We moved there when I was about 3 years old in '85, and fell in love with movies. My dad was a huge movie buff and an actor. My grandmother was an actor. My grandfather was an actor. My uncle was an actor. So I grew up watching them on stage in Utah, and would go see movies all the time. And I wanted to come back here when I graduated high school.
Amazing. So Park City, Utah is where they have the Sundance Film Festival.
Correct.
Is that correct? So how did you go to that when you were a kid? Like, was that part of the upbringing?
Yeah, I would go see limited movies. I mean, a lot of it was adult stuff because it's indie movies, but it was a big part of the culture there. You know, we, as kids in that environment, we would do stuff around Sundance. You know, I'd go to sneak into parties and stuff, and I'd go see a movie here and there when I could.
Right.
But I didn't really have a ton of money either, so.
Sure. And what was the creative atmosphere like in Park City, Utah? I've never even been to Park City, Utah. Like, what was it like kind of growing up there? Like, did you get to perform in school plays, or were you making like short films with cameras with your friends? Like, how are you getting this kind of creative outlet?
Yeah, both actually.
Yeah.
So I think somewhere around middle school, I started auditioning for plays because I wanted to do it because I'd seen my family do it, and it felt like the thing I was supposed to do. But I was not very good at it yet, so I didn't always get cast. And then in high school, started in TV production, film production, in high school, and actually outside with a program called Independent Student Media, which was specifically a program that was taken off by Darren Fletcher to teach high school students how to get into becoming a film professional. So like we would make a film where we had no cuts. We had to use, put together a 4-minute movie with no editing. And how do you shoot that? Whether it's on a dolly or something else, a wheelchair.
Right. Skateboard.
Yeah, skateboard. Exactly.
So was that program nationwide or just specific to Utah?
It was specific to Utah. I think they did it here as well at the time. I can't remember. This is a good 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it ever developed beyond that. Film production in high schools, a lot of places have some kind of film or TV department. But I haven't followed up with Darren in many years. But it was a good, mix into learning how to make a film back then. Even though that wasn't really my forte, I was more, acting was the thing I wanted to do, and so that was what I put my focus on.
So you're going to school in Park City, Utah. You're surrounded by actors. Everyone in your family is basically an actor.
Yeah.
And all you want to do is act and make content. So how old were you where you decided like Utah is not the place, I need to go to LA?
18. Actually.
18. I find this pilgrimage so interesting and impressive, by the way. The way that like just people wake up one day when they're young and be like, I want to do this. And then just this gravitational pull that Los Angeles and Hollywood have.
Well, and it's funny for me because this will come all around too when we learn about my adult life. I didn't really know what I was going to do with myself when I was 18 years old. I didn't really have a plan for the future.
Who does? Like, right. Yeah, I mean, we're all lost.
Right. And acting was the thing I always did on the side that I enjoyed, but I didn't really think of it as a career. Like it was, for some reason, I hadn't really thought of career and like what college I should go to in this.
Which guidance counselor put that poison in your head?
I know, right?
Yeah, they're like, you got to fall back on something. You got to have a skill. You got to learn something beyond just acting to like, have a real job someday. Well, did you get that?
I did, but not through college, not from a guidance counselor.
No.
I actually, I auditioned for the American Academy of Dramatic Arts when I was in Salt Lake City. Got a scholarship, and that was good enough for me.
And that's based in Los Angeles.
That is.
So you were completely on a path of like going to university, dramatic arts to become an actor. And that is an educational path.
Yeah. It can be. Yeah. I would say that the longer I've done this, though, the more I realize that education is just in the doing, not in the schooling.
Sure.
The best actors are usually formed by time,
right?
Not by anything else.
Right. Didn't Robin Williams go to Juilliard in New York, right? Yeah. So there are like some wild actors, wild comedians, wild kind of personalities that did do that 2 or 4 year like degree program.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, there are tons of great. I know NYU has a great program. I know lots of places do. I sort of took probably the biggest thread of my life has always been utilitarianism when it comes to money and spending.
Sure.
And I took the idea that, hey, you know what? I want to go learn how to do this very specifically, and I don't want to waste a lot of time and money on a 4-year university, paying $150,000 for a college education when I can get all the training I need for, a third of that or whatever at a conservatory.
Or just coming to LA and hustling for 5 years, getting bit parts and, scraping the ground for anything that, you can make a living off of. Because I've always talked to actors who just came and waited tables for years and, didn't really necessarily get their break until the 5 to 7 year period, maybe.
Well, and that's the funniest story that I had too was, I loved watching Al Pacino and De Niro and watching these great movies, these great stories being told. Harrison Ford was a huge, hero of mine. And coming to LA and becoming an actor was a very rough, eye-opening sort of experience, because not only were you not telling these great stories that you wanted to be a part of, but there was no money. There, if you were young and had nobody, no one cared. And it was very, I almost found it disrespectful when you meet a woman and you say, "Hi, I'm an actor." And they'd be like, "Oh, cool, what restaurant do you work at?" And it'd be like,
but that was 25 years ago.
That was.
And would you suggest anything has changed?
Well, for me, so what's interesting is it led me to get into business, because it wasn't so much about not wanting to be an actor. It was that I didn't want to have this feeling of that I didn't have a lot of value within the marketplace. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Like you needed to have something else in your back pocket, or maybe you just wanted to understand the business of acting and the business of filmmaking and storytelling a little bit better?
Well, so I think for me it's combinational, really. At the time, I didn't really believe in myself well enough to think that I would be super successful.
Okay.
And so I sort of fell back into this job at a company called Quixote Studios. And I sort of saw it as a door to something else, and I didn't really know what it was. But I ended up taking a job there as a stage manager, which took up a lot of my time in my early 20s. So I in fact, was not acting very much anymore. And it did, at the time, make me very sad, because I felt like I wasn't pursuing my dream.
Sure.
I wasn't going after it. But that led me to taking on a role within a year or two of stage managing, a self-titled role that the owner gave me, called the Director of Production Rentals, which was running production supplies for Quixote Studios, which at the time was a very small business, and had 4 or 5 employees, and was just renting tables and chairs and HVAC and walkies and different equipment to commercials and photo shoots and TV.
Which is a huge business in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, I stayed there for 15 years, and I built it from what was the smallest version of this business to the biggest version of this business in the world. Mm-hmm. I had 5 locations. I had one in Atlanta, one in New York, one in Burbank. We had some equipment in New Orleans, and we had our Hollywood sort of facility, which was our main facility. We had 15,000 walkie-talkies, so we were doing, movies and TV all over the country. And I had, a fleet of almost 100 trucks at the time, and about $5 million worth of equipment that we were just putting on shows all over the place.
That's huge. That's no joke at all. That you were running that sounds like a huge operation.
It was. Well, that's what I mean. Is it went from me answering the phone as this kid who was 23 years old, just trying to make a buck, to learning the operations, like intimately learning the operations of a full-fledged studio and how to build this specific business in the correct way. And it was, a joy, and I loved it. And I had the greatest employees there. It was very familial. A lot of the guys that worked for me for 15 years.
Sure.
But it, ultimately wasn't my dream either. So,
right. So how did you come out of university? So you went to 4-year theatrical school.
Yeah.
Dramatic arts.
It was 2 years actually, but
2 years. So what were you doing at school? Like, what's your average day at a dramatic arts academy? I have no idea.
A little bit of everything. You would do Shakespeare. You would do musical theater. You would do singing.
Yeah.
You would do dance or movement. They had different movement classes that weren't specifically dance.
Mm-hmm.
You would do theater history. You'd do voice training, which is not necessarily singing, but accents or how to speak correctly. What else? We would do, and then dramatic work or comedic work. We would do different scene work. So you would go through and say, hey, we're going to pull a scene from, a Western or, a romantic.
Scarface.
Yeah, or Scarface or whatever. It could be anything you want or anything you thought your casting was good for.
Okay. And that's something that you would get a chance to work on.
Yeah.
That's wild. So what did you love the best of that whole experience? Like, what was your go-to? Like, did you love to sing and dance? Were you a musical theater guy? Or were you a dark, deep, troubled actor who wanted, like, the hardcore dramatic roles? What did you love?
I mean, I love it all, but I would say my forte was musical theater.
Okay.
I was a trained opera singer in high school.
How did we miss that?
Yeah, we didn't get there. So that got me into musical theater, and there's at that time, whenever I'd audition for stuff, there was never a lot of guys who could sing. So that was a good way to get cast and stuff, and that started to get me cast in high school. It got me cast out of college and in college. So that was what I'd say my forte, and I enjoyed it a lot. But I think in my heart of hearts, I wanted to be a more character actor. I wanted to tell important stories.
Yeah.
That hopefully would influence the world in some way. So
not just aim for a Marvel movie.
Yeah. I mean, that's fun.
Sure. Yeah.
That's totally fun. And I would love the Marvel movies too, but I think, and now as my career now, owning my own business and starting to shoot, I'm starting to shoot and act more now.
Right.
At 41 years old. The thing that I find to be the most important part of storytelling, the most important part of media, is it's a reflection. Our culture is a reflection of what they learned through media. So the stories we tell, I think, really affect how the world sort of reciprocates. And not to be doom and gloom about it, but when you see how much gun violence is in the world, or you see all these different things, and you go, well, what's the common denominator? Well, what are we programming our society to say or do?
Sure.
Right?
That's a lot of higher level thinking, though.
It is.
Isn't that scary?
I do a lot of that.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Someone has to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I find this transition that you've been through amazing, because a lot of people who go and are interested in musical theater, who can sing and dance, who are interested in acting, who are interested in like becoming other people and following the written word of, a third party, a writer or producer or director, they don't always necessarily have like business acumen.
Yeah.
So how did you figure out like, hey, I'm actually really good at running a business? Because you to me, it kind of seems like you came into, production services at a similar time when productions were moving out of LA en masse because it was just too expensive to live here. Like, and Georgia, like Atlanta, started having huge film credits, and Canada. I mean, there's huge amounts of films being done in Canada. It's amazing, like 20, 25 years ago, how movies left LA and maybe haven't even come back.
Yeah, they're runaway production is what the term is coined.
Yeah.
But a lot of it started with, at least nationally, it started with different states giving better tax credits. So it made sense if you were going to drop $20 million in the state and you could get 25 or 30% back from that state, and you could get all the same locations you needed in that place. Why not shoot in Atlanta versus LA?
So walk me through this state by state tax credit, because I've lived abroad for like 25 years. So the states are competing with producers in Hollywood to attract their filming locations to come to their state. And what are they offering in return?
Well, so the states offer basically a rebate.
Mm-hmm.
Every state has a different rebate, and it can change based off your local legislation. So most, if you look at the film commission for any state, will fall somewhere between 10 and 30%.
Okay.
And that's for production spend, which is usually qualified as anything you buy, rent, or any service you hire, or any person you hire from that place. So, for instance, the reason why Atlanta has such a big film community is because a lot of the crews and a lot of the talent and a lot of the different people live there now because it's cheaper to live there. But if they get hired on a movie and you're paying this person $400 a day, well, in the producer's mind, in the back of their mind, they're like, oh yeah, well, we're going to get 30% of that back or 25% of that back when we file at the end of the movie, when we file with the state. Hey, we're getting everything we spent. So whether it's labor or a service like hiring a layout board or hiring a truck or hiring lighting or grip, a sound equipment, whatever, anything you could hire, any service you would hire, that's all rebatable. And then in addition to anything you would purchase there. So any of the things that you would need for that production.
Hotels, F&B,
Yeah.
the whole thing, right? Yeah. So
It's a lot of money.
exactly. So when I was filming, when I was traveling all over the world making my adventure shows, I had a really small crew, and I couldn't imagine like showing up in India or Kyrgyzstan and like just working with a local crew. Like that would have blown my mind, because me and my guys, we had like a second hand. We were super efficient in the way we communicated, the way we executed on a daily basis. So we could always kind of come in, under budget and on time. That was kind of our goal. How did these film companies, go from LA to Atlanta and just pick up with all these local teams in Atlanta and still kind of execute in the same way? Like, is the level of the people doing the work in Atlanta or in Seattle or in Vancouver, Canada, is that at the same level as the people you can hire here in LA?
Yes, I would say it's variable because it depends on what you want to do. So like, for instance, Tyler Perry opened his studio by he bought an old military base in Atlanta.
Because those are easy to get, I guess, or?
Well, I'm sure it's because it was cheap,
Yeah.
and because it had a lot of facilities, it had a lot of ways to shoot, which during COVID actually really helped him out because he was the first one to begin producing content again because he could quarantine all his cast and crew within the barracks of his facility.
Yeah. Did you see that Netflix movie, The Bubble, where they go into production during COVID in England? And they're in like this, they're in this estate, and they're in this like castle, but they're filming as well, and they have to do checks all the time. It's absolutely hilarious.
Oh, that was my whole career for all of COVID.
Really?
Yeah, I was one of the people who got the LA production industry through COVID.
Oh my God.
I helped build a company with other friends. We invested in building hand washing stations. Because when we tried to buy hand washing stations, that was necessary per the white pages of the production industry saying, hey, every union shoot needs a hand washing station on it. Well, in June of 2020, they were completely sold out. You couldn't buy one on the internet.
Right.
Go on.
Yeah.
So we hired art department guys to build them. We built 120 hand washing stations. We had them all over. HBO had them. Tons of companies had them.
Just so that you could keep producing, as per the white paper, which was essentially the Bible of filming and production during COVID.
Yeah, which is ironic because that Bible was written by Steven Soderbergh, who had made the movie
Outbreak.
Not Outbreak.
Oh.
The other one. It's Pandemic or Epidemic.
The one with Kate Winslet and
Yes.
Matt Damon.
Yes.
Yeah. What was that?
I want to say Epidemic or Pandemic, but I think it might be. Maybe it's Pandemic.
Outbreak was with Robert or De Niro and like Cuba Gooding Jr.
No, it was.
Oh my God, we're having trouble with our pandemic films here.
No, I know. It was. It wasn't Robert De Niro. It was. I'm not on the internet.
No worries. I could probably search it up here.
I want to say it was Pandemic, but it was. He basically had told the story of what would happen during a pandemic, and that movie kind of breaks it down. So they said, "Hey, like you should be the person to fashion how we're going to shoot during this," and so he came up
So he was in charge based on a movie that he filmed.
Well, along with, I think, the CDC and a few other people from the state, right? Like they kind of got because he understood how a production has to operate. So first it started with, well, if we're going to shoot, what are all the things we need, all the departments? How do we segregate those? How do we make sure that those people are touching? And then we are adding in all the science to it as well. But he had already done all the research, right? That was the point, is to make that movie effectively, he had to have the knowledge already.
So I've searched it. 2011 pandemic thriller starring Matt Damon called Contagion.
I remembered it.
Contagion, yeah. Epic. So Soderbergh worked with the CDC to produce like a safety Bible.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's get to COVID in a bit, but what was it like working in production before COVID? It must have been a dream.
Yeah. I mean, I had I got to say, I have been very blessed. I had a very, very good team of people. Had a very, very good company I worked for. They always made the right choices. They let me have the latitude I needed to invest in things when I knew it was a good time to invest. And that made it a dream to work there. And I would still act on the side when I could in little parts here and there, but it was hard to do it as a full-time job, because if I got cast as, in a 3.5-week role on an indie movie, it would be hard to leave my work for a month.
Yeah. That's always the rub, isn't it? Like the whole point of going to the castings and going to the acting and waiting tables is because you're free in case that thing does happen. It really does stop you from like having a real job, building a real business, because you have to pick up and go at any moment.
Which is the question about the quality of life, right?
Right.
That was the question for me, is I didn't like the quality of life I had as a young, poor actor. I didn't feel like I was a man. It was a little bit emasculating.
Right. Why? Because making money was so difficult, or because you just didn't have enough work to make you feel like you were busy?
Well, because I didn't have enough money. I didn't have enough. You had to be either a waiter or a bartender, and that's pretty much the only jobs you could sort of go into. And even those were sort of coveted, because if you had a high-paying bartending job and you had to quit for 2 weeks to go do a job, that job would not be back there when you came back. Some other actor would have it, and
that's how competitive it was.
Yeah.
I
mean, if you went into a restaurant, even like an Olive Garden, you said, "Here's my resume." If it doesn't say 10 years of working in restaurants, they're like, "Sorry."
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's intense. Yeah.
So the question became, is like, well, what is it? And that was my always question that bothered me, was like, how far do I want to fall in the sword of my art?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And how long do you wait before you say, okay, I quit? And I didn't want to quit, but I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to try and do something else, and I still have this dream alive. So I would act on the side when I could. I went to class when I could, and still worked at my executive job as the VP of sales for Quixote.
Yeah. So to have a Japanese samurai's mentality of how far do you want to fall down on your sword to keep that dream alive, or to keep that lifestyle alive? Yeah, no, that's intense. Like, do people do it till they're 25, 30, 35, 40? They do it until they want to have a family, or like have a quote unquote like a normal life? Like, what is all that? What does any of that even mean?
Well, and that's what I mean, is most of the actors who I knew when I was in my early 20s now sell real estate, or they do something else. Right. And
because the industry just chews you up and spits you out.
Because they could never make real money. They could never buy a house. They could never, it was very tough to, it's sort of a transient type job until you become successful. And success as an actor it's very, very difficult. Like 1%, less than 1% of SAG makes 99% of the money from SAG. I believe that's the statistic.
Right.
A lot of the celebrities and the A-listers and B-listers kind of dominate most of the money. Most SAG actors don't make $35,000 a year acting.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So it's a very competitive industry, and I believe Jason Alexander said in some interview, he said, yeah, as an actor, you really need to have something else also going on. It should be a hobby until it can't be.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And Jason Alexander obviously played George Costanza on Seinfeld, so he got through somehow.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a different day and age back then.
Yeah. I love that. Do you ever hear the story of his audition?
No.
He was sending in a tape, auditioning for this thing called Seinfeld, which he thought was bullshit, because all he wanted to do was act on stage, because his whole pedigree and his whole education was all about New York stage life. Like he was born to play on Broadway. But then he had heard Larry David was writing, and he knew Larry David because he'd seen him do stand-up, and he was like this neurotic, internal monologue that just came out all the time. So he basically did his audition like Larry David, and just mimicked Larry David. And then that whole character is just Larry David.
That makes so much sense. And Larry David's like, this guy's perfect.
Yeah, this is exactly what I wrote. I wrote it for me, and George Costanza is it, and there you go. And Jason Alexander just nailed it.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So many good stories come out of stuff like that.
Yeah,
for sure. So how did you make this transition into production services, and how were you, like, did you have an agent? Did you have a manager? Did you have people that were still lining up some work for you from time to time, like while you were working in production services? Or what was that balance like? Or was it just like 100% you had to move on from acting?
So initially I was on tour with a musical in 2005, up in San Francisco and here. And I came back and I needed a job. And I had a friend who worked at Quixote and just got me a job there as a carpenter because I had carpentry skills. So I did that for a month or so, and then I got moved into a stage manager job. And then after a couple years of that, that's when the owner, I went to him and said, hey, I want something that's better. That's, I'm sort of, my intelligence is being wasted on just moving C-stands and sandbags in circles. I want something that I can really sink my teeth into and also become more successful.
But as a business owner, that must be terrifying, because if you have actor on your resume, you can lose that person at any time for a month or 3. So
well, yeah, he knew, though I had been with him for like 2.5 years. So he knew that I was coming, to him with, hey, I want to do more and I want to earn more. And so he offered me a business that honestly no one had cared about. It was, the production rental business at the time was so small that it was barely covering its own cost.
And why is that? Is it because productions were buying and owning their own stuff, or were they working with the studios and just filming in Hollywood all the time?
There was just other vendors that were better at that particular vein of business, at production rentals, walkies and Wi-Fi and tables and chairs and all that stuff like that. Yeah. So it was just a very small business at the time, and I said, hey, I wanted to have a completely different job at the time. He offered me running this one, and I said, this was 2007, right before the spill.
Because in 2008, we all got kind of desperate kind of quickly, didn't we? Yeah, of course we did. Yeah.
So he offers me this job, and I look at it and I go, well, this is the least sexy business ever, because I was like used to working at the stages, which were sexy.
Yeah.
And then I realized there was no place for this business to go but up. It was either going out of business or was going up.
And you had the acumen to figure that out, like in the first couple of weeks or even before you took the job?
I had the intelligence to know that I didn't know what to do, but I also had the creativity and the vision to understand that I could learn.
Right.
So I did learn on the job. It took me a good year and a half to get understanding the marketplace, to understand how to make more money with the business, how to deal with clients, how to, shape the business in a way. But once you do something for 2 or 3 years, it becomes very, back of your hand.
Right.
So once I was very malleable myself in learning how to grow the business, then it became easier for me to scale it.
And then, of course, you're hiring new people, training them up, building out new locations across the country.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Hollywood is expanding, just going everywhere.
Yeah.
Huh.
And I didn't, for the first almost 10 years, I didn't really focus on acting while I was scaling that business. And it wasn't until I went to Europe for the first time in my life in 2016, where I was sitting in the Forum, just on a broken column, just crying my eyes out because of how beautiful it was, that I kind of came to the terms with the realization that if you're not doing what you love with your life, then what are you doing?
Travel has a good way of making you recognize that moment, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
And so I came back and I got into an acting class because I said, you know what, of all the things, it's not about whether I get paid for it. It's not about whether I'm famous. None of that matters. It just matters that I'm doing it. Just do the thing you love to do.
It'd be nice to know that there's a reservation or a table reservation waiting for you any given night, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, don't get me wrong. All that stuff is great. I would love all that too. But
the craft, the acting craft, that's where you wanted to be, is just actually practicing it, getting better at it, sharing it with the people you're you're working with, right? Like,
well, if you think about it, I don't think Van Gogh ever made any money off his paintings back when he was painting. So if you're a painter,
yeah,
is it important that you sell your paintings or is it important that you paint?
right. I mean, that's the artist's life, right? Your work becomes hugely valuable once you're gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea, too, of when you choose to do anything artistic or anything creative for that matter, does it matter that you get paid for it? Does it matter that you do it? And that's I think, up to the person, doing it.
That's the truth. Yeah. And when you're in it, that's the happy place, like actually doing it. The problem is, though, if you're like producing as well, and then you need money to pay for everyone to do things and pay to hire companies like yours for all the production services. Or for me, like when I was making my adventure show, traveling all around the world, airfare, hotels, it all adds up and it just becomes pretty painful.
Well, and so the beautiful part that I wanted to get to is I've now opened my own business in Culver City called Versatile Studios. I own my own cameras. I own my own lighting. I own my own grip. I own my own production rentals. I own my own trucks and vans. I rent them to my friends, and I also shoot with them. And that's what I've been doing the last year. I just shot a short film that I produced and acted in last month, which went fantastically. We shot on an Alexa 35. We had great class. We had a great crew. And now I'm finally getting to go, okay, you know what? Now I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm not going to just be an actor waiting for someone to cast me. I'm just going to start making stuff.
Yeah.
And eventually I got to break in that way.
Isn't that is so telling of like the industry. I really feel like like for me, I really wanted to be in television, and no one liked any of my ideas. No one would give me any money. Like the Discoveries, the Nat Geos, the BBCs of the world, Netflix, all the rest, like they weren't interested, blah, blah, blah. And then I just started making stuff. And then it all just caught up and caught on, and now the shows are kind of everywhere. But finding that initial like chunk of money, like I had to do the whole thing by myself, and then I also had to produce, direct, and host on my own because I couldn't afford to have a independent producer, independent director, or anything like that. So it ends up being just a crime of passion.
Oh yeah, I mean I've been learning cinematography and lighting for the last 9-10 months, just because, not because I ever want to be a professional one of those, but because I want to understand how those guys think and what they do when you're looking at a scene and how to paint the scene,
Yeah.
What are the pitfalls that they're going to look at too, right?
Right. Now go back to your formal education in acting, musical theater, dramatic arts, et cetera, et cetera. Was there anything in that taught you how to direct or produce? Because I know NYU, for example, they have, side courses on writing, directing, producing. A lot of my team went to NYU. So I kind of have an inside scoop on what that was like. But I'm curious if you touched on any of that in your education, and is that what made you kind of somewhat confident that you could pull it off now?
Yes, to a degree. I would say, so for me, acting and storytelling in general, like acting and directing and writing, are all kind of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're just trying to communicate to an audience an idea or a set of ideas or a set of emotions or a through line or a story. An actor has to do it with their body and their mouth. A director has to direct those actors to shape the story the way he wants, while also looking at the bigger picture of, what's being shot, how it's being shot, what's in frame, how to frame something. And they're working with their DP and their gaffer to figure out and make sure that's all correct. But I think acting for me, the framework was when you look at most content being made today, and you look at the importance of what's the most important part of how a story is told. Well, typically in my eyes, it's always the writing, the directing, and the acting. So when you see a movie like a David Fincher movie, usually that's very elevated because he takes the time to make sure that they're acting and that the writing is correct.
They're quite specific in those tasks.
Yeah, I mean, the opening, I believe I saw a video that said the opening scene of The Social Network, they had like 99 setups for what was 2 actors sitting in a bar talking to each other. Different camera setups, different lighting setups. 99, it took them like 2 or 3 days to shoot this one scene.
Right.
And when you watch that scene, it's a masterpiece. A lot of people talk about that scene, say it's brilliant.
But most people don't have the money or the budget or the time or the brain to put together something like that.
Or just the thought to be like, hey, how important is it to get, these 2 actors doing this perfectly to set up this whole movie?
Right.
Right. And that's how deep in it Fincher will go with his actors and his writing. And that's on the Aaron Sorkin movie too. So it's, the best writer in Hollywood, pretty much, or one of them.
Right.
But I think for me, that acting background gave me the background for telling a story. The business background that I have is informing me with how to produce. And there is a creative side to producing too. And I would say I'm not a super skilled producer yet. I haven't gone super deep down that road, but I'm getting there. But my understanding of business and how to procure things and how to look at costs and how to look at schedules, all that comes into play with producing. You have to understand is when you read a script, is this doable for the amount of money and the amount of time they're asking? And look,
how many scenes, how many locations, how much do you have to travel, the props, everything that's needed.
Yeah. You're like focusing on a business level, like, oh, this is going to cost this, that's going to take this is going to take that much time. No matter what, they'll say we can shoot it in 3 hours, but that's probably going to take 5, boom, boom, boom. Making all those minute decisions when you're looking at a piece and going, yes, we can do this, or you're going to need more money in 3 more days.
Did you ever hear that Macaulay Culkin story of when he was working on Home Alone? So Home Alone 1 was a huge success, and Home Alone 2, they wanted to make again and cash in on it. And but because he was underage, he could only spend like 4 hours a day on set or something ridiculous like that. Yeah. And he's in every goddamn scene. Yeah. So they had this, so they said like Home Alone 2 took like 6 months to film. And if Macaulay Culkin had been over 18 or an adult actor, they could have done it in like 2 months. But because he was underage and he had to spend so much time like exercising or studying or resting off set, and because he's in every scene, the whole movie got dragged out for like 6 months. And you think of the cost of having to do that, of all those people who had to work like an extra 3 or 4 months just to facilitate the star who happened to be a child actor.
And it probably lost money.
It might have. I don't know. It did make hundreds of millions of dollars.
I mean, could have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it did very well in the box office, but relative to what it cost, I don't know.
No, exactly. It's relative to what everything costs. So here's one thing. So now after getting all this business acumen of building out this business that is your livelihood, when you're now in the last year going back to producing, directing, managing actors, managing a production, does it give you the same satisfaction like managing a production, directing, producing, that it did acting? Or are those two separate skill sets and separate kind of moments of satisfaction for you?
I think they are two separate skill sets. And I think now, for me personally, I'm starting to feel like I'm validating everything I went through in my life to get to this point right now.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a great example. In 2018, I went to my acting teacher, Joe Police, rest in peace. Wonderful, wonderful man. And I was frustrated because I said, I'm VP of sales at this company here, but I'm an actor here, and I don't feel like I can fulfill both needs. And he's like, what's the problem? And I was like, well, I can't really be an actor because I'm doing this job over here. And he goes, just do them both. He goes, you've got a better setup than most actors in the city, period. Like, you've got a great job, you've got good money, you have resources, you have a network, you have all these things. Like, own that, love that, use that, and just be happy when you get to go act and keep working on your instrument. And I was like, oh, okay. And now it's like, okay, well, the skill set for acting is really more for the skill set of storytelling. And whether I acting or I'm directing or any facet of the creative process of storytelling, I look through the lens of an actor. But the business side, because I ran this business for so long, the production side and the logistics side, now my business hat goes on, which is also a creative hat, just different type of creativity. I get to use that to sort of shape how, and I understand when anytime I look at a shoot or anytime I look at a script, like I said, one informs the other, but I could not do any of what I'm doing right now without the experience of both.
So you have so much experience in production services and managing a production. Can you just look at a set anymore and be like, yeah, that's perfect? Or do you just look at it and be like, okay, that's $100 a day, that's $50 a day, that's $500 a day, that's $3,000 a day? And are you just looking at it like dollar signs of how much this production is like costing you per day?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I look at it from the nitty gritty because I started with the equipment side.
Yeah.
So like, as I'm scaling this new business right now, I'm buying different pieces of equipment, both lighting, grip, camera, etc., and trying to value, like, is it worth buying this thing or renting it, right? Certain things are worth buying and certain things are not, right? For instance, Alexa came out with the Alexa 35. It's a $70,000 camera. Is that camera worth buying or is it worth renting?
I have no idea.
Well, no, the question is how much you use it,
Right.
right? So I would never buy a $70,000 camera because if I didn't use it every single day, it wouldn't be worth it. But to a DP who might be renting it on all his jobs, it might be worth it.
Yeah.
Right?
True. Yeah.
So, like, when I looked at buying when I was looking at buying a camera, I bought an FX6 because I liked its low light settings. It's dual native ISO. It's variable ND that's built in. It made it a very, very usable camera for all sorts of run and gun things in low light, and you could use it outdoors.
It's amazing.
But it's only $6,000.
Yeah, I used the FS5s for almost my entire production career, like because we were traveling every week and we were in a different country. We were shooting outdoors, shooting in the rain. We used those Sony FS5s. They were great cameras.
Yeah, and for me, that FX6 was, this is an investment that if I want to go shoot something, I can go whenever I want. I don't have to ask permission. I don't have to rent. I don't have to send an email. I can just pick up my camera kit and go.
Did that facilitate freedom? Like having the equipment nearby, did that like give you the freedom to create more? Or was that like a burden of like, hey, I got to get off my ass and do something today. I have all this fucking great equipment here. I'm not using it.
Well, to me, it's dual purpose. It's, can I rent it today and make money off it? Or can I use it today to shoot? And some days I don't do either, but that's okay. I'm okay with that because I understand that it's a tool and I can use the tool to either on my business side or my creative side.
I always felt like the more equipment I had around me that I wasn't using, the more that weighed on me and gave me more stress. It's like, oh man, I should be out shooting something. Like I should be out creating something because I've got, $30,000 worth of camera equipment, in the house, and I should be getting out there doing something even if I don't have my crew with me.
Well, no, I mean, definitely there is part of that feeling of I want to be doing more, but it's also it does come down to cost too. Like if I want to shoot something on my stage and do a test by myself, fine. But if I want to shoot something, a narrative piece where I need a few other actors and I need a few other crew members and whatever, then there's automatically a cost associated, right?
Sure.
How much is it going to be to edit? How much is it going to be to color? And is it worth doing? Like what is the thing we're going to shoot actually have some tangible thing outside of just a showpiece, right?
Right.
Like the short film I just shot last month, my friend wrote and directed. I saw it, I read it. I was like, oh, this is great. It's a great showpiece for us because it touches all the emotions of it's funny, it's dramatic, it's dark, it hits grief, there's crying, and then there's coming of age, and it like rides this nice emotional storm for a thing that'll probably be 12 or 13 minutes. People will, I think, hopefully feel this. They'll go through this thing and at the end of the short film go like, oh, what a perfect short film because I felt all the things.
Yeah, they rolled with the character and the emotions and the whole arc, right?
But it's kind of quirky too, and it's kind of different. It's about a sex doll. So,
okay.
A man who uses a sex doll to get rid of the grief of the loss of his wife.
No, that's tough already.
It's tough already, but when you actually read the script and when you watch what we shot, like it takes you on this journey because you're kind of like, oh, it's kind of funny. And then it's like, oh, this is kind of weird, kind of creepy. And then it's kind of like, oh, it's really sad. Look at him. He's just kind of pathetic. And then at the end, he gets over it. And it's like, oh, this sex doll helped complete him and made him a mannequin. So it's kind of beautiful, right?
So we're looking at a Tobey Maguire spinoff.
Yeah.
Complete me.
Yeah. But no, I mean, the point of it was my friend who's a producer, he wants to direct and he wanted to be taken seriously as a director and writer. And I think it was a great piece. So let's make it.
So that's what you do. You want to direct, and then you start off making a short, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta prove that you can do it.
So you shot this movie in, let's say, the end of 2023, December 2023, a month ago.
Yeah.
So it's 12 to 15 minutes long. It's a short film. So where is it going to go? What's it going to do? What's your distribution plan for that like piece of art? Because I have no idea. I've never made like a short film or anything like that before.
Sure. We're gonna try and send it to the bigger festivals. We think it's good enough that it should be able to get into like the Sundances of the world. Not to say that we won't send it to smaller festivals, but I don't think we have the money and time to send it to 150 festivals. We'll probably have to send it to like 20 or 30.
And I've heard like the big festivals don't like accepting stuff that have already been at other festivals. So there is like a hierarchy of like, importance to play.
And I think too, when a good festival submission team watches it, they'll be like, "Oh, pros made this," because they'll see the money we put into the production values, just understanding all everything we did. Once you watch it, you go like, "Oh yeah, this was made with a lot of love and a lot of time and a lot of money." And for what we spent versus what we should have spent,
Yeah.
the value's there on screen. You see it.
I don't know. It sounds like something for the Cannes Film Festival. I think the Europeans will love it.
Well, maybe. Yeah, I mean, they do love textiles. Or do they? I don't know.
I don't know. I think they're definitely bigger in America, but going to Cannes in May is awesome.
Yeah, I've never been, so I want to. I've been to Sundance many times, so never to Cannes.
Yeah, you got to use Sundance is on right now.
Yeah?
Yeah. That's where we're missing it. Okay, so when you were before you started your own firm, just this last year,
yeah,
you were full-time in production services. So you got to walk me through what COVID was like, because COVID has, and maybe also too, if you feel comfortable with it, like the actors strike, because I can tell you in March, so I lived in Shanghai for 18 years. And then I left in 2018, 2019. And then I was traveling like 300 days a year making my BBC show. We were filming like 10 episodes, 10 expeditions, 10 countries, 10 months. So it was really hardcore for many years. And then when January 2020 came around, I was in full production. Like we were rolling. I had my whole crew with me. Everyone was paid for. We had a big 2020 planned, big 2021 planned, projects in the books. It was great. I had a really tight team. I've been working with all of them. I had like this NYU mafia. I had 6 guys from NYU all like on the books. We were making 2 different series at the same time. In February 2020, I was in Myanmar filming in Burma. And then in March 2020, I was in Ethiopia filming in northern Ethiopia and in Simien National Park. And it was incredible. And then I just remember a lot of people were like, "Oh, don't go to Ethiopia. Something's not stable in the world. Like you shouldn't go." And I'm like, Africa will be fine. Like no one's closing borders in Africa. But what everyone did was they closed borders of people coming out of Africa.
Sure.
So I got screwed over. I ended up not being able to go back to Dubai, which is where I was living. I got to the top of a mountain in the Simien Mountains. My cell phone was just going off. And it's like the whole world is closed. And I was in Ethiopia filming.
So how long did you get stuck in Ethiopia?
Okay, so the story goes is that I was offline for like 2 or 3 days, not really checking my phone. And then we got up to the top of this mountain. And the guide was like, "Okay, guys, we have a cell phone signal. We're up high enough here." Prior to that, we were down in the valley. And he's like, "Take 10 minutes, check your phones, make sure no one's dead, et cetera, et cetera." So we were just like, okay, yeah, checking the phones. And then it just like was chaos. and one of my friends was like, "Hey, Dubai closed their borders to residents." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," because I'm a resident of Dubai. I was a property owner of Dubai. I was a business owner in Dubai. I was a legal resident of Dubai, but I wasn't a Dubai national. I didn't have a UAE passport. I have a Canadian passport. So, and Dubai closed their borders to residents like me. So I was in Ethiopia. So what happened was we got to the top of this mountain, checked our phones, and we're like, "Holy shit, we got to get out of Ethiopia, because if this is happening in Dubai, it's going to happen everywhere." Yeah. And so what we did is we called a driver to pick us up, and we had to hike about 8 hours from where we were to the nearest road. And we got to the nearest road, and then we were near Gondar, which is in the north, which is where the Simien Mountain National Park is. And then it was like a 12 or 14-hour drive back to Addis Ababa, the capital. And the whole time we were in the car, we were going through our phones and just watching like every country closing, just borders closed, borders closed, borders closed. And I have a Canadian passport. I could go back to Canada, but I hadn't lived in Canada since 2001. So I didn't have anything there, and I didn't just want to like live in my brother's basement. So the whole time we're going back to Addis Ababa, like Chad, my DOP, like he wanted to go back to Bali because that's where he was living in between filming. He couldn't go back to Bali because Indonesia closed their borders. So he had to go back to Canada, and he hadn't lived in Canada since 2001 or 2 also. Like he was like me, we'd lived abroad our whole lives. So we had nothing in our home countries, which is the only place we were allowed to go. And then at the last moment, I figured out like Turkey still had their borders open. So I got on a flight from Addis Ababa to Istanbul, and I arrived at 7:30 a.m. on March 21st. And that same day, 5 p.m., Turkey closed their borders, and I was in Istanbul for 4 months, pretty much by myself.
Is that where the cats came from?
That's where the cats came from, yeah.
Full circle.
Full circle. the COVID cat project. But I mean, when I was driving back to Addis Ababa, like I didn't know what was going on really. Like I hadn't been watching the news. I've been watching it a fair amount since January, but I had no idea like that countries would be so brazen to just close their borders. And then of course I got stuck in Istanbul for 4 months and I didn't know what to do with myself because I'm a global adventure television producer and host. Like I didn't know what to do just sitting around for 4 months. I was so wrecked and bored. But the cat helped.
Yeah. That's, everyone has a different COVID experience. Actually, I have two I'll tell you.
All right.
Which are pretty good. So one, as COVID came down the pipe for Coyote, we started seeing all these jobs cancel, all these commercials, TV, films, they're all canceling all over the place. And so we sit down, like the CFO, the CEO, and our VPs, and we look at it. And
was this like January 2020 or even earlier?
This was March 2020.
Okay.
Like before the closure in LA, probably like the first week of March, because we see all these jobs canceling and everything's happening. So the CFO is like one of the smartest ladies I've ever met. And she's like, okay, I already did the math. She's like, if we close down and we keep everyone employed, we're going to run out of money by June. If we close down and we lay everyone off, we're going to run out of money by like October. Which is the expenses, rent, and all this stuff. And mind you, nothing is in place yet because no one's closed yet. So she's already calculating how long the company has to survive, right?
Yeah.
And we're like, wow.
These are important numbers to know. You got to know what your runway is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so as we're canceling, the decision came down, like CEO said, hey, we're going to close. I think it was March 23rd. And everyone was laid off. And, soon thereafter, the state and the federal came up with the, extra money for everyone who was laid off. So It kind of worked out.
So did that help you personally?
No, not me personally.
Not you personally?
Well, the reason why not me personally is because first we used our sick and vacation time and we got paid out for that. And then we we're tendered, we're designated as laid off so we can file for unemployment. But because I was a vice president, me and all the other vice presidents got a call a month later that said, hey, you got to come back to work at a reduced salary.
Well, so you were too high up the totem pole to get like the free money that everyone else was getting?
No, it's not that. It's that our CEO had enough foresight to say, hey, I want to bring you back to work. You're going to work from home, but we're going to figure out how to get through this pandemic. We have to figure out how to reopen and what we're going to do. And so, and mind you, like a business as big as this was very complicated. So like, the first thing I said, well, what do you need to do, Sean? Well, what's the first thing you need in your business? I said, well, I need to run all my trucks because all my trucks now are sitting and the oil's just getting to the bottom of the wells and we're going to have so many maintenance issues if all the trucks aren't running. We need to run them once a week.
I had no idea that was even an issue.
Right. Well, no, I mean, that's the thing is the things that I think about. So I was like, the first thing I need is I want to bring my fleet manager back. And I want him to just work on the trucks because we have a backlog of maintenance issues. So he's a really good mechanic. He knows this stuff in and out. And I want him to run all the trucks every week to make sure they're in good working order. That way we know when we come back to work, our trucks are going to be able to work because those trucks carry the equipment and those trucks make us money. So we want to make sure those are still good.
And if the trucks aren't good and the work comes back, then you're screwed because you have to say no to everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Or we would just have breakdowns on set. People would be freaking out. So
that's even worse.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the first order of business. I said, I want to make sure my trucks are good. And then I brought my floor manager from production rentals. And I said, hey, there's a ton of things we need to get repaired. I can have these two guys working at the shop, not touching each other, not within, whatever.
6 feet.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, we didn't even have 6 feet at the time.
Right.
None of the science had been done yet. Like we didn't know. I mean, this was April, right? Like they're still just trying to figure out what the disease is. Right. And so, that was how it started is I came back and so then the white pages came out. When those white pages came out, I went through and I read everything and I said, I know exactly what I have to do because Steven Soderbergh laid it all out. I was like, I need to build plexiglass dividers on wheels.
Yeah.
I need to get electrostatic sprayers with, antibacterial spraying. I need to get air scrubbers, which is hilarious because like I bought a ton of air scrubbers and none of the other vendors in Hollywood, or I don't think anyone else bought them for a good year. I bought these air scrubbers, 500 CFM, 1,000 CFM, 2,000 CFM, just to clean the air because every hair and makeup wardrobe room or trailer required one. Because if you're doing hair and makeup on an actor, you need to have clean air. So they want that circulating.
Okay.
No one else bought them. So we made money hand over fist off these for the first year before anyone started to compete. And it wasn't because of anything else. I mean, we luckily had deep enough pockets to be able to go out and invest in this stuff. And I convinced the people, hey, this is what we need to buy, and we need to buy this now because this is what I do.
So just walk me through what were the white papers exactly, and how did that allow everyone to get back to work?
Okay, so basically Soderbergh and the CDC and whoever else was a part of that team that wrote those white papers were saying, hey, in a COVID environment, how do we keep people from getting sick if we're going to be shooting TV shows or movies or commercials? How do we get the media industry going again in an environment where there is no cure? So from masks to safety goggles to gloves to hand sanitizer to hand washing protocols to, all those things. It was looking at if you were in a hot zone in somewhere in the world and you were a doctor going into a hot zone, how do you keep yourself from getting sick? Now, how do you take those same applications that a doctor has to use to keep themselves from getting sick and then apply it to a film set?
So actors, directors,
right. And
audio.
what are all these people doing, right? It's one thing if you have 4 art department guys in a room or a warehouse building something by themselves, but an actor has to take their mask off, right?
Yeah.
So
and top up their hair and makeup every time they put a mask on and off, like it's a mess.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's everything. The hair and makeup people need to come and touch them every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes. So they had to come up with a set of protocols that said, hey, this is how we're going to move forward and hope for the best. And when they'd have an outbreak on set, they'd have to shut down for however many days while everyone quarantined, and then they'd come back. Or if like one guy got sick and no one else tested positive, then they'd have to backfill that person, an AC or a grip or a whoever. Yeah. And it was a very complicated process, but the industry in general was shooting again in July.
After a March shutdown.
And it was busy. It was busier than I've ever been in my entire life by August.
Really? That's how fast it came back?
Yeah.
Because I was stuck in Istanbul until July.
Well, that was just the film industry. It was they knew that we had to get back online because it was the commerce machine.
Right.
It was advertising. It was NFL football. It was everything.
Yeah. For the whole state.
For the whole country. For the whole world, really. I mean, this is still the media capital of the world, and it was not just LA, but, everywhere in the United States. It was like, how do we shoot this way? And of course, England and everyone else was following suit, saying, well, how are we going to shoot? How are we going to do this? Because such a big portion of our economy is driven by what's being shot.
Wow. So with the white paper and the protocols in place, you were having your busiest quarter or your busiest half year starting in January 2020 August 2020 after COVID.
Yeah.
Protocols had kind of kicked off, and you guys had prepared by buying a lot of whatever PPE was needed to get back to work as quickly as possible.
And manufacturing all the gear that was required to operate. So, I mean, and I only knew I had to do it because I knew our production rental division, we managed 60 or 70% of the productions within LA, greater. Like Paramount instantly saw us. There's send everything to Quixote because we were right down the street from them. So Paramount just started getting all their tables and pop-up tents and everything because they were like, hey, these people have COVID figured out. It's we didn't figure it out. We're just doing what the white pages said to do. So I'm I figured out how to buy what they said I should buy and then provide it.
Yeah. But how hierarchical was that? Because whatever was in those white papers,
yeah,
was going to be an added cost to any production. So basically with those white papers coming out, it was the way I saw it was, from the outside looking in, the way I saw it was is that only productions that could afford all the PPE and everything that needed to be done for COVID, only those productions could even think about coming back and actually getting to work. All the independent productions just couldn't even think about it probably.
Right. There was a COVID budget. Let's put it that way. So
what percentage of the overall budget was the COVID budget? Do you have any idea?
30 to 40%. But most of that cost was in testing.
Really?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to film during COVID in 2020, you had to prepare an extra 20, 30, 40% to your overall film budget, and most of that was just to test people on set every day.
Correct. So if you were shooting a commercial that cost $250,000 to shoot, it was a 2-day commercial for a Toyota whatever SUV, then you were going to probably spend an extra 75 to 125,000 in COVID-related expenses. So they had 2 separate budgets. This is the shooting budget. This is the COVID budget. What goes in the COVID budget? Well, anything in the bucket that's COVID-related. That's testing, that's equipment, that's, down days, whatever. And sometimes that would be variable too, because if you had an outbreak on, let's say, a TV show, well, that COVID budget would go up because now all of a sudden you'd have to pay for the down days, right? So if you had a location and you're paying for that location, well, now we got to extend the dates on that location so we can get through it because we don't have the crew because they're all at home sick, right?
That's insane. That cost, that run-on cost it's exponential.
I'm very proud of what we did through COVID. If I could go back in time and quit my job and get into testing, that's where the most people made the most money, because testing was crazy.
Yeah. So I was filming, as a comparison, I was filming in Europe in summer 2020. So what happened to me was I was in Ethiopia. I got out, luckily, got into Istanbul, found my little cat whiskey, and then, because I was drinking a huge amount of whiskey at the time. Fair enough. But then in July, basically I was sitting in Istanbul, and every day I was looking at where you can fly, where you can't fly. And I needed to get into Europe because during COVID, I realized, if I can get into the EU had closed themselves off to the rest of the world, but internal travel in the EU was possible. Right. So what I did is I repurposed my team to start working with tourism bureaus and partners in Europe to start moving our global filming locations all into Europe somehow. And then we were sitting in Europe, we're having Zoom calls like every day or every other day. And we're like, okay, instead of filming in Peru or Colombia, which is no longer possible to travel around the world, I can get from Istanbul, to Europe. And then once we're in Europe, we can just drive everywhere and get as much filming done as possible because we're making an outdoor adventure show. We're camping. We're quite isolated. We're not really in the cities except for the first day or two or before filming and stuff like that. So we felt like that was an acceptable level of risk, to get back to work. And we don't have big budgets and things like that. So I remember in July 12th or 13th, 2020, I flew for Slovenia, Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia. Slovenia opened up their borders, and Slovenia is part of the EU, the Schengen visa zone. Slovenia opened up their borders to flights from Turkey. Oh, wow. And that was, since I had arrived, I was not able to fly from Turkey to Europe. So, and Turkey was on a bit of a red list because they didn't give a shit about COVID and they didn't shut down anything. Yeah. So they just went for it, right?
Yeah.
So there's whatever this is, we're staying open. So, restaurants and bars were closed, but the rest of the city was pretty functional. They just didn't want to give people an excuse to show up and be around people, but you could still go out walking and take public transport. Everything was kind of open. So Turkey, because they stayed open, was on a red list. So I was in Turkey and I couldn't go anywhere because Turkey was on a red list. And then Slovenia opened. So I went from Istanbul to Slovenia. Okay, great. I was in Slovenia. Now what? Okay, great. So now how do I get out of Slovenia? Because I had heard maybe the border with Slovenia and Italy was closed, but I need to get through Italy to get into Switzerland because I had a contract to film in Switzerland. Okay, so how did I get there? So then I didn't want anybody to be able to track me or figure it out. So I hired a driver to take me here, and then I hired another driver to take me there, and then I rented a car, but I picked it up in some place no one would think, and then I drove it into Switzerland. And I was like, okay, now I'm in Switzerland. So I had a contract. Then I was able to get, because Canada was on the green list or whatever, I was able to get my crew into Switzerland from Canada. So then we were able to all film in Switzerland. So we filmed in Switzerland for a month. Then we went to Germany, Heidelberg. Then we went to Poland. Then went to Malta. And then we went to Croatia. And Croatia was totally open when we were filming. This was September, October 2020. And then this is when the second lockdown started. But Croatia was open. And I remember Pedro Pascal and Nicolas Cage were filming in Croatia. They filmed The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, the movie that they had. The whole thing was filmed in Croatia just because it was open.
Right.
Yeah. So Europe was super hit and miss. But I remember filming in Croatia and then Montenegro in October, November 2020, thinking holy cow, we got a whole summer of filming done. But we didn't expect the second lockdown. And then all of Europe shut down in November. What happened in the US coming Q4 2020?
You're asking what happened?
Yeah. Did you guys just roll right through it?
Production just rolled right through it as far as I was concerned. The second shutdown, I mean, I'm sure it was different in different states, and I'm sure it was different in different places. My experience was, come July, I was back in my office. I mean, granted, we were talking on walkie-talkies and have people come in my office and whatnot. Everyone was wearing masks, 6 feet, the whole thing.
Yeah.
We had protocols for shutdowns. If someone got sick, they'd have to go out and be gone for 10 days and all that. But we were basically back. And I forgot to mention too, just because it was top of mind when you said it. In May of 2020, I actually decided to open a restaurant with some chef buddies up in Solvang because I was staying in Solvang so much before I went back to work. And so one of the best times to invest in a restaurant is during a pandemic because all the restaurants went out of business. So we got all of our restaurant equipment for almost nothing.
Oh my God, that's so.
And now we have a Michelin rated restaurant. We don't have a star yet. We're working on it. But
amazing.
Yeah.
You're like, so you and I will open a restaurant during the next pandemic.
Yeah, please. It's a good investment then.
Yeah.
Well, we got like a Rational oven. It's a $50,000 oven. We got it for like $3 or $4 grand.
Wow. So just a fire sale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because all the restaurants were going out of business.
Wow. And now it's open and running, and it's been going strong since 2020.
Oh yeah, we've had our best month last month. So, it's delicious. If you ever get up to Solvang, Coast Range, it's my shameless plug.
Okay, no worries. Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah, it's very good.
Amazing. So you got through COVID with this business, and now you've started your own business because I guess you want to move away just from production services and get more back into the creative space.
Well, no. So I'm still doing production services, and we're doing so very successfully, but I kind of took the model that Quixote wanted to have, but got too big for it to actually do, and I'm doing it now, which is I get all lines of business on one job. So I'm building location packages with your camera, your lighting, your grip, your production rentals, all that stuff in one truck. And because there's a lot of run and gun production, it used to always be you need a 10-ton lighting truck and a 5-ton grip truck and this because you had to go for scale and because all the gaffers and grip owned that. But now it's so much easier to shoot. All the lights are lower power draws and they're lighter, so they don't require as much grip. And, there's reflectors that bounce the light in a certain way so you can diffuse it easier so you don't need as much diffusion. Mm-hmm. So I've been building packages for people where it's like a more full all-in experience. Certain types of jobs, and I do still a lot of commercials and print stuff with my studio, and I have a photo studio down in Culver City, and we provide that for everything for equipment. It's fully turnkey, so you don't need to hire a truck with lighting, you don't need to hire a truck with grip. You just show up and everything's there and ready to go.
That's amazing. But what about you getting producing and directing or getting into this with your friends, like you're starting to get back into that creative space again?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I mean, basically the business is, I'm hoping the business can make me enough money that I can just have my income from that. Mm-hmm. And then I can use the assets to shoot when I want, what I want. And hopefully, within the next years, people will come knocking to pay me for that too. So to me, it's a means to an end from business. It's like, hey, if someone hires me to shoot a job, whether it's producing, directing, whatever, I'm just going to flow all those rentals and all those things back through the job. So more money coming to me or to my businesses.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It makes total sense. But I mean, but also too, it's great that you can use that to facilitate your creative output because most people, that cost barrier of getting all that equipment, putting everything together is sometimes that's the barrier for people to be creative in some cases.
Well, that's what I was going to say is how many directors own their own studio, their own lighting, their own grip, their own cameras, their own stuff. I mean, a lot of them something.
Yeah. But they're not a one-stop shop.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is a new business model for me, both as a vendor for the film industry. It's like I'm trying to provide a new model for people where it is a one-stop shop so they don't have to go to 3 or 4 or 5 different vendors to pick up all that stuff. But also the idea is, hey, for me as a creative, I can leverage all that stuff, for me, my own stuff on the side. And then as I get paid for stuff too, it's just a way to make more money off those jobs.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, we'll see how it works.
It sounds
going well so far.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. What about so beyond just business, like what's it been like living in LA for 20 plus years?
Look, I'll say this: LA is one of my favorite places in the world. It's there's a beautiful, melting pot of people here, and there is some really great community when you find it in the right places. I know that a lot of people don't necessarily always feel that though, because it can be a very disjointed place. It pushes people apart because it's so big, and it's hard to find those communities depending on what you're looking for. But I think for me personally, like, I probably want to stay here another 5 to 10, and
Months?
no, years, but 5 to 10 to build this business and to work on building myself into the creative career I want. But I much love, I want to live in Montana. I want to live in the mountains. I want to get back to nature.
How powerful is nature?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I go hiking in Griffith Park every day with my German Shepherd, and it's like, it's the best part of my day, and while I love the museums and the restaurants and the art and all the things that LA has to provide, going to the Sierras for a weekend is,
Total magical.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I got into, so actually it's very funny. I was living in Shanghai for 18 years, and I was a photographer for the New York Times. And then I was also a photographer and a freelance writer for lots of other publications. And living in Shanghai with 35 million people every day started driving me a little bit crazy, because it was just this pressure of people all the time. And a lot of people, like, I kind of like have a crowd phobia now, which might also be why I started a career to climb mountains and walk across deserts by myself.
Yeah.
But I basically like needed to get out of Shanghai on a regular basis. So I started going out to like Western China, Tibet, all these places where they had mountains and open space. And I started going out with some friends and climbing and trekking and living in a tent for a week with Tibetan guides and yaks and donkeys, and go on, having them all carry our food in our tent and our petrol for the generator. And I started learning about all these logistics of having to put together these like 10, 14-day, 200-mile trekking trips through the Himalayas and stuff like that. And eventually I flipped those two worlds over. I just said, like, okay, I was 300 days a year in Shanghai and 60 days a year out in the wild. And then I just flipped it to being 300 days a year out in the wild and actually being able to work and make content and make TV shows, and then spending as little time in Shanghai as possible. And that was part of my, development of how I started moving into television, which was all about nature, all about getting out, at like extreme treks for BBC, Expedition Asia for Discovery Channel, even the Tough Ride shows where we were like motorcycling all around the world. Those were, incredible, but just so powerful to be out on the open road and to be away from people and the chaos of cities.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there was a line from 1923 that news show that Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren are in. I believe it's what's his name? Dalton, the guy that played Bond in the 80s.
Timothy Dalton.
Yeah. He says something along the lines of, the city is man's mastery of his environment, or something along those lines. And I thought about that because I was like, it's true. The city is mastery of your environment. You can cook, you can clean, you can have all these things that access to it. But like, from a spiritual sense and from a connected to the earth sense, and I think all of us, when we go out into nature, be like, oh wait, I feel so much more connected to the world in this space. The city, that environment is very, very antithetical to how we want to be,
right? Yeah.
It provides all these like niceties, but it also it feels foreign in some way.
It's absolutely terrifying, like how nature affects you. Like when you spend a lot of like time out there. Like there was, what was the famous quote? I was just looking for it now, with John Muir. So John Muir is the famous, founded the Sierra Club. He's the famous environmentalist, naturalist, whatever. And he says, like, every walk with nature, one receives far more than he seeks, right? It's just like, he had this idea of the city is where you go to live and maybe earn a living or whatever, but those times that you come back to nature, that's when you heal yourself. That's when you recover. That's when you grow. That's when you develop. And I got into this rhythm of being addicted to being out in nature. And of course I was filming this TV show where I was like on the top of mountains, and I was doing like these 12, 14-day trips across deserts in Mongolia. And I just became addicted to being unreachable. Yeah. And it was spectacular. Like, I was making money filming, I was doing my job, my producers, my partners were all happy, but I was cut off from the world for huge amounts of time, and I'd never been happier in my life.
Yeah. You were living the dream, I think.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a wild ride. And then I started up this just because I want to meet people. Yeah. So I've kind of committed myself to doing a whole bunch of these chats, conversations, just so I can connect with people in LA, because I've only been here like a month.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's one of the reasons I love podcasting is not only the ability to learn and get someone else's perspective, but also the ability to, relate to one another,
on a human level.
Yeah.
We don't get to do that so much anymore.
We have a lot more in-depth conversations in this kind of environment than most people do in their regular day.
Yeah. And I love it too. Like, people are like, what do you like the most about the podcasting? I was like, well, it's not the technical aspect. Like, I had to figure out the technical aspect myself, but yeah, just connecting with people and having like really nice long form conversations. Doesn't matter whether it goes 30 minutes or 3 hours, just to connect with someone in the same room again after, like decades of being away and on Zoom with people in LA and New York and never really getting a chance to like sit and chat with someone, to doing this and the intimacy of like this kind of conversation. I love it.
I do too.
Yeah. Do you still want to make a podcast at some stage?
Yeah, I do. So I'm a huge fan of the Tim Ferriss Show.
Of course, very famous writer, personality, podcaster. Yeah, the whole thing.
I mean, I look at him like the grandfather of podcasting. So his whole podcast.
Oh wait, that's Kevin Smith.
Wow, okay.
Kevin Smith for sure. Do you remember the old Fleshlight advertisements when they're that? No. So Fleshlight like gave birth to podcasting. I know that sounds funny because it's a sex toy, but like all the early podcasters, their only advertisers were Fleshlight. And I remember like Kevin Smith and Joe Rogan in the early days. That was like their only advertisement, was just like, hey, get this Fleshlight. And it was like some new porn actress was promoting some Fleshlight. It's like, use Rogan.22 or whatever to get a discount on a Fleshlight.
Sidebar, for like a good 10 years, I used to run a theme camp at Burning Man. We didn't even get into that.
Oh God.
But my buddy put in a fleshlight in the ground. He stuck it in and put a sign that said public fleshlight. It was just there. Like, you could walk by and be like, did anyone use that? I don't know.
Public fleshlight.
Yeah, it's not good.
All right, well, hold on. Before we get into podcasting, maybe you do have to go back. How was Burning
Man? It was one of the most amazing, and is one of the most amazing places on the planet.
Did you get caught up in the rain this last Burning Man season?
I didn't go this year.
No. Actually. Okay. Was it a while back?
Yeah. So I started going in 2007. I started running a camp in 2011. I became mayor of a village for a few years. That was crazy. So I was in charge of other camps.
So there's like village mayors at Burning Man.
Yeah, basically it's mostly about placement. It's not about, a hierarchical ego or whatever. It's just about, hey, you're in charge of a block of the city. So you know where all the camps are placed, and you have to communicate with them, and you share resources like power or gray water pools or whatever.
Right.
So it's just that person communicates with the Burning Man organization to make sure that they know what's going on in that block.
That's amazing. I've never been, so this is all just totally foreign to me.
Yeah. So Burning Man, look, when you walk out to Playa on a given night, and you look around and you see all these art cars going around, you see all these art projects that are lit up by different LEDs, and they're massive sculptures, and you see all these art theme camps, which is what I used to do, like big art installations that you could go inside of or climb on top of. And you realize the entire city is just built on love.
Okay.
Because you can't buy anything there. There's no commerce. The only thing you can buy there is ice and coffee, and you can buy that at Center Camp. Everything else you're not supposed to be able to spend money on, right?
And so that's the whole purpose.
It's decommodified, they call it. And so when you get into this environment, you realize, hey, like the different level of artistic execution that people do. Some people spend millions, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars building giant art projects, however they get the funding, whether it's the self-funded or they, find people who want to put in money. All this stuff is there just for your enjoyment.
Right.
And it's like nothing else in the world. The only thing I could compare it to from an artistic standpoint is like when you're walking around Vatican City, because you're surrounded by art in Vatican City, except for that's for a different reason, right? Here you're surrounded by art, but it's just people who brought things for you to enjoy for your own sake. And when you get into the community aspect of the city, you realize that all the people there are all very supportive of one another. There's there's no judgment. People walk around naked, fat, skinny, tall, old, short, doesn't matter. No one cares. As long as you just walk into a place and you're just there to have a good time and laugh, people accept you.
That's amazing.
Yeah. There's hardly any violence. There's never any fighting. There's really hardly any of the things that you see in a normal society. Like, it just kind of sucks it all out because people are there just to enjoy their time with one another.
And how long does it go for? I'm really naive about Burning Man, by the way. I just haven't.
The event is about 1 week.
Mhm.
So they usually open Saturday at midnight now, I believe. The week before Labor Day is usually the event. So you get that extra Labor Day time to get home. And then it usually closes that following Sunday. So it's about 8 days. But if you're building a camp or an art piece, you can get there as early as sometimes a month in advance, sometimes a week in advance. Depends on what you're building, the scope of what it is.
To prepare for the opening so that everything's ready to go when the crowds come in.
Well, like the year they brought the 747, I think they had to go 2 or 3 weeks early to get that there because they had literally cut a 747 apart into many different pieces, and then they had to rebuild it back on Pyle to get it.
Are you serious? So what was it? A restaurant? Was it a hotel? What was the 747?
It was just a dance bar. Like, there was a DJ on the top, and you just dance inside it.
Inside it or on the wings? Like, yeah. Just the whole thing.
Yeah. If you Google it, you can see 747 at Burning Man. You'll see pictures of people dancing on the wings and inside.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, every piece is just, it's whatever someone can come up with and whatever they can execute. That's the beauty of it. So I for years with a camp called the Mystical Misfits would build large scaffolding structures. So 1 year it was a tree house, and 1 year it was, we called it the piano bar at the end of the earth. And we had a craps table and whatever, it's silly. It's whatever we could imagine.
So did you somehow pull your early experiences from woodworking back into your Burning Man personality or your Burning Man responsibilities?
Well, my woodworking history, my equipment history, I rented generators. I know power distribution. I know grip and lighting. I know all this stuff. So literally my professional career provided me the framework to do that.
And how much of Hollywood is in Burning Man every
a good portion. There's always celebrities. Joseph Gordon-Levitt goes a lot, and I know Rosario Dawson's been there many times. But a lot of big corporations from Silicon Valley go there. Like, they treat it like a creative retreat, so they take all their higher ups to go and expand your mind, figure out what we're going to do next year. They don't say it like specifically it's a business retreat, but the idea of you take these people there, it creates a sense of camaraderie, and it creates a sense of growing creativity.
Sure. And physically, the Burning Man site is in California or Nevada?
Nevada. It's about 80 miles outside of Reno the way the crow flies, but it's about 150 miles to drive there.
Okay.
Down the Black Rock Desert.
Amazing. Spectacular. I should go at some stage.
Yeah, you definitely should. It would blow your mind.
Literally blow my mind.
Yeah. It'll change you.
I don't know if I'm ready for that level.
Yeah.
That level of change, it can be a little scary.
Yeah. Well, change is always scary, but necessary. It's part of life.
Mind expanding. Have you ever gotten into the ayahuasca stuff in LA? Everyone's telling me I need to do an ayahuasca trip.
I've done ayahuasca, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How was it?
It was the most powerful experience I've had in my entire life.
Do you want to get into that, or is that
Sure, we can talk about it.
Because I filmed a long time ago. I filmed in Peru, and we wanted to go to Machu Picchu. So there's the Inca Trail, which is super popular, and then there's the Salcantay Trail, which is less popular and easier to do because for the Inca Trail you need to book a year in advance. So we showed up and just did the Salcantay trip, but the whole time I was filming in Peru, everyone was asking me, do you want to do ayahuasca? Do you want to do ayahuasca? And of course, I didn't want to really do it and be on camera, losing my mind, throwing up, having this purging, cleansing experience, which everyone tells me about. But I've never actually sat down with anyone that's done ayahuasca and got the baseline of what that experience was like.
Yeah.
Are you up for it? Do you want to go on the record and just chat about it?
Yeah, why not?
All right.
Let's go.
Let's go. Take me.
So I did it with, without giving up any names, I'll keep it a little bit anonymous, but I did it with a very, very powerful shaman who was also Canadian, who's a musician. And
the shaman of comedy, Jim Carrey.
And his guidance was, it was 2 nights, 5 hours each night, all in darkness. And he would play different instruments, guitar, sing. And it was literally like watching Bruce Springsteen, except for during an ayahuasca retreat, because he was that good. He just kept playing and taking you on this journey musically while you were going through your traumas, or while you're going through your happiness, or while you're going through all these different experiences as the, what we would call the medicine takes you. And it really is medicine. I truly believe that. I'm sure a lot of different places will call it a drug or call it something, but
a hallucinogen is the thing that most people can consider to be, right? It's like you hallucinate, psychoanalyze yourself. Like,
well, that was the thing is for me, my experience was, mind you, I had different experiences with psychedelic experiences. So like I was pretty used to this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So when I did it, what it took me through was the journey of looking at myself, looking at what I believed, looking at why I believed what I believed, looking at why I choose to live a certain way. And I would analyze all these choices like on a very, very minute level, like analyzed every single relationship I ever had with a woman, why it went wrong or where it went great or what I should do, what I could have done better. And really, really taken heart. And I would be laughing my head off to crying as deeply as I could. And I shit you not, I was agnostic my entire life, and it was the thing I did to find God. It was the first time I found God.
Really, during your first ayahuasca experience? Wow.
I was so, I had an experience with another person in the room that was so powerful that I just went into prayer and I started praying for like 30, 40 minutes straight. And I never pray. I don't go to bed and pray. I don't wake up and pray. I don't go to church and pray.
Mm-hmm.
I've always just been like hippie dude that's like, have fun.
Yeah.
Business guy, but, actor guy. But God was never on the menu for me. It was just, my family, because of my family experience when I was a kid, God kind of went out the door when I was very young.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was 15 or 16 that I had this moment where I was like, wait, what do I believe? Oh, I don't believe anything. Like I don't actually have a framework for what I should believe. So that's when I started to read about religions. And then I was like, well, how do I decide now? How can
It's tough. It's impossible.
How do you decide what to believe once you've never actually been forced to believe anything?
Yeah.
So I couldn't. So I was smart enough to know like, oh, I don't know what to believe. How do I make any assumptions about the greater universe? And like I would learn little factoids along the way that was like, oh, that makes sense. Max Planck talking about quantum physics, that kind of touches God.
Mm.
Some of the things I read in the Bible, some of the things I read in, Kabbalah, all that stuff touches God, but none of it would, like Buddha. Yeah. Meditation is so close to prayer. I was like, there's something there, but how do I find the answer? And it wasn't until this experience where I was like, oh, I feel like I'm in touch, like my soul, my mind is in touch with the earth. It's in touch with it's in touch with the everything. And all of a sudden I didn't feel alone.
Okay. That's amazing.
And it was, like I said, the most beautiful, most powerful experience of my life, because I left there going, okay, not only did I work out a lot of the stuff I needed to work out for myself personally, but it gave me a framework for how to believe and what to believe about the universe. And for someone who, like I said, admittedly couldn't really make a decision, it wasn't about being lost. It's that it's hard to be found by something when you're faced with the question of choice.
There's too many choices.
Yeah.
And if you start
decision fatigue for God,
decision fatigue for religion, I think is a real thing. Like, cause I took a class in university called like world religions, and I grew up kind of Roman Catholic Christian. I went to like a few Catholic schools when I was a kid, but I kind of rejected it quite early. And then when I started traveling, you start going to Tibetan monasteries who are practicing Buddhism, and then you start seeing Sikhs in India, and you start seeing, Taoists in China, and then you start seeing Muslims, in Central Asia, and how Islam and the way the Muslims practice Islam, how that changes as you go from like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, like they all have their own take on it, right? Whether you're Sunni or Shia, and then you just become, at least it happened for me. It was just become like there's so much out there, and it's like you said, it was like a decision fatigue. Like, how do you believe in one thing, and the problem is if you believe in one thing, you're not allowed to believe in something else. And I was always kind of like struggling with that fact. Like, if there is higher power out there, why would they restrict inclusiveness?
Yeah, I mean, I've literally came up to, and this thing I'm working on for a show, like the biggest problem with the world, or with humanity, I should say, is indoctrination.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right? The idea that why would Hamas do what Hamas does, or why would Russia invade Ukraine? It's because certain people in certain places believe certain things because they were indoctrinated in believing that thing, and so that is their truth. But in the end of the day, kind of like what you said about just being in nature, like reality, how we perceive reality is just about what comes to the lens of our eyes, our ears, our taste, our touch, our smell, our feelings. All that's the only reality. Everything else is fiction, laws or borders or commerce. These are all ideas in fiction that we've agreed are laws, things we should share. But indoctrination is the thing that keeps people warring against each other, because it's like, oh, I believe this so stringently, I will kill for it, or I will die for it, or I will do something horrible for it.
Yeah. And war is good business, sadly.
Which is also fictitious.
Yes. Oh, we could go so deep on that. Okay, here, go back a sec. So your ayahuasca experience, when you planned out to do ayahuasca, when you thought of doing ayahuasca, what kind of head space were you in? Were you hurting and looking for answers, or were you feeling great and you were like coasting and you're just feeling like strong and powerful, and it's like, okay, time to dip my toe into this kind of psychedelic opportunity to kind of investigate the self?
Well, hurting and looking for answers.
Yeah.
What I was alluding to, the project I'm working on a TV show about healing right now, about all arms of it, to get out, most people, when they have psychological damage, when they have some kind of trauma in their past, depending on what it is, they only have so many levers they can pull to work on it, right?
It's like having the skills and the tools to solve and to understand what's going on in your own world.
Right.
Yeah.
And so my past was such that, without getting into it too deeply, was, I had a lot of trauma as a child, both sexual and family. And so by the time I was an adult, I wasn't good at having intimate relationships. I would basically nuke them before they could become anything. And I went through all my 20s and 30s basically destroying every relationship before it could really turn into a marriage or a long-term thing. And when I looked in the mirror and I said, hey, like, the common denominator here is you, well, what is that? And so I started doing a lot of work on it. And I abused cigarettes, I drank, I was very, very self-destructive. So I had started to battle that for a long time, of saying like, well, okay, why am I this way? Why don't consequences matter to me? Why doesn't my own health matter to me? Okay, well, let me look at what I need to do to solve this. So I started doing all the different things. I did Tony Robbins, I did Landmark, I did therapy, I did AA, I did all these different things to look for the answers to what was wrong in here and what was wrong in here. And once I started to go through that, I was like, well, like, what else is there? What takes me further, and what actually feels permanent, that makes permanent shifts. And that's what my show is about, is testing the limits of those: ayahuasca, ibogaine, different psychedelics, sound healing, all the different modalities that are out there, both in ancient tradition, religious tradition, and different cultural modalities, and why they exist and what they actually do. What they do not only on a spiritual level, but also looking at what they do on the scientific level, right? So mixing some of these practices with people like Andrew Huberman or Joe Dispenza, looking at the science and the spiritual, and kind of combining and saying, okay, well, what's happening in the brain when it happens, right?
That's amazing.
So that's the show. I'll show you the sizzle afterward.
That's amazing. Yeah, when it comes out, we got to like play it and actually talk about this again. I follow this one comedian. I won't mention his name, but he was on a podcast a while back, and he suffered depression his whole from he was a young child. I guess maybe I think he mentioned he went through some trauma, broken parents divorced when he was young, something like this, and he's been on pills for like 30 years. He's like my age, in his 40s, I think, and he went and did an ayahuasca session, and then he did another, and then another, and he basically is no longer clinically depressed, and he's off his pills for the first time in his whole life. And he completely, rightly or wrongly, and this is obviously one experience out of millions, but he completely attributes his breaking the cycle of his depression with these ayahuasca journeys or experiences that he's had. And I found that unbelievably interesting.
Well, what a lot of scientists, I believe, the River Styx is doing some work on this. Andrew Wheels, a doctor in Arizona, I believe, also has talked about this a lot too. Psychedelics, the thing that they do in your brain is they create new neural pathways. Right. So if you exist within the framework of your reality for a long time, let's say depression, your neural pathways are so set because you've run this program so long. I'm a depressed person. I don't like myself. I'm sad. I'm this. I keep living in this one lane, and your neural network exists within that framework. So the minute you start doing some healing, and you start adding these psychedelic different things, ibogaine, 5-MeO, eat DMT, ayahuasca, etc., they are actually reprogramming that neural network in your brain and creating new networks so you can think differently. You can actually exist in a different space. Yeah. So depression or whatever else you held on to can change,
that's incredible.
It's really, really interesting stuff. And that's why it's like, for me, I wanted to bring it to the forefront because I've lived a life between Hollywood and Burning Man and all this stuff. I've lived a life where I've been extremely experimental, and I've been okay with that, where as a lot of people in certain other parts of the world would look at it and be like, demonize it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I lived in parts of the world where that kind of experimentation is like completely criminally illegal.
Right. Yeah, like maybe even to put to death, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you're doing stuff like that in China, for example, or in the UAE, which is completely like against drugs in every way, shape, and form, it's very tough.
And for me, it was, well, if I can create a piece of media that shows what actually is happening on a scientific level and can prove it, not to say that I know what the long-term effects of ayahuasca will do to me, right? But if I can show examples like your friend, where it's like, hey, like this person was this way for a long time and they did 3 sessions of ayahuasca. Now look at, 2 years later, let's do an interview and talk to them and see how their life is. Oh, they're in shape now and they have a business now and all of a sudden they're like active in society. What did we fix?
Right.
Why did it get fixed?
I feel like we only hear about the positives. Where are the people that like went off on an ayahuasca journey and just like their lives even fell apart even further?
Well, that would be the other part of it too, is to look at all these things and say like, what actually works and what are the risks?
And I think too, like you could also probably make an argument that everyone's like neurological wiring is different from everyone else's. So whatever works for you wouldn't work for me and vice versa.
Well, that's why it's like you need a big enough test group and big enough sample size to understand, hey, what's going to happen? And like you said, if psychedelics do create new neural networks, then yes, it probably can slide to the negative too. It can probably get worse.
Right.
But how do we find that out as a society, as a learning society that's growing all the time, and I'm talking the world society, not just America. Well, we have to start asking these questions because, I mean, for me, I think, my own healing was tantamount to the most important thing for me. So I could move forward and just have a wife and kids, be like, okay with that. But also I realized when I was going through it, I was like, oh, I want to share this with the world because I know there's other people that have this issue or have these issues. And how can I show, how can I create something that shows people a guidebook, a little bit of what you can do, what's out there, and how it's effective, or if it's not effective for certain people, what are the risks, what are the non-risks?
Yeah. I think the hard part for a lot of people is that a lot of people, I think, are looking for alternative medicine.
Yeah.
Or alternative experiences that can help them heal or unlock different paths, neurological pathways or way of thinking. But I think like trusted vendors or trusted partners in these kinds of experiences are the things that scare people the most, sadly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, of course. I mean, trust is everything, especially in these. I mean, it's just like a doctor. It's like, You trust a doctor because someone's licensed him to say that you should trust him or her. And you've gone to this doctor, maybe made a relationship with them, so you trust them. But when it comes to anything beyond that, you say, well, how long have you practiced ayahuasca?
How many ayahuasca trips have you been on?
Yeah.
Have you facilitated, right? And then it becomes like a hit or miss. Like how many people went mental, or how many people, suggested that it fixed things.
But I will say this, from the experience I had, the one experience I had with it, going into the room and seeing the people, I could tell there was a lot of trauma with those people. Some of those people so much so that it was like, oh, wow, like I can't believe this person. Like you can tell this person is really gone. And coming out Sunday morning when we all shared, you could tell everyone had a shift in the right way.
Okay.
Everyone would share and just be like, oh, like I came this and this. And, I don't want to give anything away because it's a very anonymous experience. I won't say what these people went through.
Of course.
But I felt like everyone came out shifted in a positive light.
That's amazing.
So
yeah,
I think it's probably closer to 100% than it is 50.
I almost equate just going out like into nature as being like almost a psychedelic experience, because you go out, like for me, for example, like I would go out and climb a mountain, right? So you go out for 10 or 15 days, you climb, you acclimatize, you sleep in a tent, you sweat, you work out, and oh my God, the dreams at altitude are unbelievable. I mean, I need to interview a dream doctor at some stage, because there's something that happens to your brain when it's lacking oxygen, which makes the dreams so intense. So the higher up you go, if you're up at like 6,000 meters, 7,000 meters above sea level, which is like 22, 24, 25,000 feet, Everest is obviously the highest mountain at 28.8, but there's a lot of other like accessible mountains in the 20 to 25,000 foot range. And you go up there and you're like hallucinating in your dreams without taking any substance, just pure oxygen, lack of oxygen.
Well, I was going to say, it's probably DMT.
You got to explain that.
So you can watch on Joe Rogan, and Mike Tyson talks about his experience with 5-MeO DMT. But DMT is, I'm not going to say it right scientifically, but it's like dimethylene trypto something or other. Anyway, it's this substance that's in your brain, and it exists only when you sleep and when you die. It gets released. Yeah. And it's the thing that causes your dreams.
Oh.
Okay, so now they've figured out how to take it substantively, put it in your body, you can inhale it, and you go into a dream state where you almost completely black out for about 10 to 15 minutes. You will like go under and have fractals and patterns and lights, and your eyes will be open, but you will not see what's in the room because you will be completely out of your head.
That's insane. And that's that's something you can take in a pill form or something?
You smoke it, yeah.
Oh my God.
So yeah, look into 5-MeO DMT, but because it is a natural part of our process, of our body process, probably when you were up there, your brain was probably creating more of it, or at least you were more aware of it in your head because you didn't have as much oxygen, and so your dreams went off the chain as a result.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, because they say like once you get up above like 6,000, 6,500, 7,000 meters, so like once you get up above like 24,000 feet, your brain starts dying slowly.
Yeah, you're in the death zone.
You're in the death zone, right? So you just start having all these like crazy dreams. And of course you're only sleeping kind of like 30 minutes to an hour at a time, because you're waking up because you're suffocating. So you're catching yourself falling out of breath on a regular basis. And so the intensity of the moments are unbelievable. And then you just keep snapping out of it and then drifting back in. And that's like, that can go on for days. It's epic.
Sounds like a party.
It is. I had no idea the conversation was going to go this way, but that's the beauty of it. How kind of valuable would you say psychedelics have been to kind of the man you are today, like the person you are sitting here in front of me?
I'd say it's very valuable, not just from my healing experiences with it, but I had some experiences with my Burning Man past or whatever. I think what it did for me, and probably my biggest forte as a person, is it opened to me, and it gave me more empathy, and it gave me an open mind. So typically, when I see most people in the world get really upset about stuff, it's because they're clinging to this idea that that whatever it is that they want, whether it's money or success or someone to like the clothing they're wearing, it's like they put so much emotional stake behind these things that aren't really typically important in the larger scheme of things. And so as a result, I've always been very, very big picture about the world. And I try and, while I've had my own emotional problems inside, it's helped me be very, very understanding and open to other people's problems and understanding to other people's perspectives. And so I'm very, very malleable and very empathetic within my framework of how I communicate with most people.
You're the most un-American person I've ever met.
I know. I should just probably go to Thailand and hang out and just scuba dive because I love that.
What's empathy? What's America's version of empathy?
Probably giving someone money.
Probably just giving someone an envelope full of money. Exactly. Here you go.
Pathetic to your causes.
Yeah, just there you go. Just take it, walk away,
Yeah.
go the other direction. Yeah. No, like what you just explained to me is the opposite thing of almost what I hear everyone in the United States say. I mean, like, because I really feel like after living abroad for 25 years, coming back to North America always seems, and I include Canada in this as well, rightly or wrongly, people will leave comments and whatever, but I really feel like this part of the world to be incredibly isolating, emotionally, and there's a real lack of global understanding in this part of the world, and part of it is because we're so isolated. Like, the reason why the United States has prospered so much in the 20th century is because they weren't dragged into 2 world wars. Like, they were able to pick and choose when they fought, how they fought, where they fought. It wasn't happening on American soil, right? And that isolation gives a certain perspective on the rest of the world, and it's not one of empathy in most cases. It's one of, you're looking down at people, or you're trying to change the way they do things and not really accept them for who they are, or whatever imperialistic, capitalistic reason why the U.S. has a reason to go out into the world and change things.
Yeah.
That's where you get that lack of empathy. You don't get the United States going to, invest in a country or help a government do something and then have them actually like go in there and build positive change. They're just going in there to make a buck.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
we could go way off the deep end on foreign policy on that one. But
no. Well, I'll say this. I think it's my perspective on business is sort of my same perspective with empathy, is like my restaurant. I want it to make money, and I want it to make money for me, and I hope it does. And it is now. It's doing quite well. But what gives me more joy than any check that comes in the mail is when someone goes, I had one of the best meals of my life at the restaurant, because I'm providing a service for the world. I'm providing a service for people. And it's coming from a place of not profiting, but rather a place of giving people a better experience. My studio, the reason I'm doing it the way I'm doing it, with the turnkey nature of getting all the equipment and stuff together, is like, yes, I'm disrupting the market a little because I'm making it cheaper to be able to shoot, because all the stuff is there and I can get all lines of business in one call. But also, I want to make it easier for people to do their jobs. So the producer can go just like, oh, this is just an easier experience. I don't have to put as much work and effort into this.
So this whole philosophy around empathy is across every aspect of your life.
Yeah. And to me, business is that. Is a good business is it creates a better dynamic in the world for people to have better lives, right? Like if a business is a good business, it should improve the quality of people's lives while also improving the quality of the people that work there. And I think America, I would say it's not universal for America, but I mean, a big part of the problem we have as a country is, well, let me put it this way. Someone said it to me, it was a book I read this in, that it's a book or a video, I forget, where they said a big part of the problem with Western thought was when Rene Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. That sort of permeated into capitalism and imperialism because it gave the idea that I am the most important thing and my thought is more important. So it becomes very much an I paradigm. And when you think of like the problem with, let's say, Republicans versus Democrats, it's my perspective that's correct. It's not our perspective. It's I have to stand on this totem pole or this totem pole, and we have to agree to disagree, but we have to somehow come together. It's like, well, wait, why are we always fighting? It's because we're apart. We're set apart, right? Whereas Buddhism, on the other hand, was, well, he took it further than Rene Descartes. I'm going to forget thought completely and forget the ego and go into this idea that it's not about me, just existing.
Yeah.
Just being grateful for this moment, being present, right? And when you think of the rest of the world, or a lot of the rest of the world, or you think of a lot of the countries where people have a perspective that's more like that, it's about the community. It's about the family. It's about the friend. And we have these two, that dualistic nature of is it about is it about my success or how important I am in the world, or is it about the greater good?
Yeah.
And one, I think, sits over the greater good, and one, I think, sits in it's about me, not about us. It should be.
Well, I think the more you travel through the East, you really realize like the more it is about like the us, right? The we, like whether you go through parts of Asia, especially like if you get into the Buddhist part of the world in northern India, Nepal, Bhutan, and all these places, there's a huge kind of we're in this together collective mentality, right? Like I did this motorcycle trip around India back in the day, and it was like 10,000 miles, 54 days, almost died every day. It was a religious experience onto its own. But I remember like one day we went to this place called Bodhi Gaya, which is where the Bodhi tree is, which is where Prince Siddhartha was enlightened and then became quote unquote like Buddha. Like that's where he basically became enlightened and realized his path, right? And then there's stories about how, that journey took him through Central Asia into Tibet and everything like that. And that's how kind of like the Buddhist path expanded. But going to India and sitting in Bodhi Gaya is heavy. Like you feel the weight of, not necessarily maybe the fact that Prince Siddhartha was enlightened there, but the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have gone to that site looking for answers or looking for clarity, right?
Hundreds of millions probably at this point, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think like, where I struggle with organized religion, I do quite enjoy visiting the locations where people go who are faithful to that organized religion and trying to understand like why they go and what they're looking for as a better way of trying to understand like humanity in general. Because, you live in China, you go through Tibet, you go to India, you go to Saudi Arabia, like you go to all these places all around the world, which are key locations for organized religion, Vatican. It's interesting, whether you believe in it or not, just to explore and ask questions and understand, why, what visiting these sites gives people comfort.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the reason why I've always looked at the American Indians as some of the most forward-thinking people from the sense of past, right? Because they didn't believe in possession, right? So when the white man came to America, it was, is this your land? Like, it's just land. It's not, how can I own this?
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, oh, well, then it's our land. It's like, no, it's just land still. Like that idea.
Property is the basis for everything.
Well, possession.
Yeah.
Possession is the basis for everything.
Yeah.
So when you talk about, Israel, why are we fighting about it? Because who owns it? Whose is it? Who does it belong to? Doesn't belong to anyone.
That's you're walking into fire.
No, but it doesn't belong to anyone. That's the thing. It belongs to all of us. This world belongs to all of us. It's you can draw as many lines in the sand as we want, but 1,000 years from now, if we're all dead, it's still just land.
No one's thinking that far out. But like you cross enough borders in this world and you realize like
it's just land.
It's just land. And I don't know why everything is so damn hard. Yeah. I mean, you travel, you travel 300 days a year with, 400 pounds worth of camera equipment going through customs every 2 weeks. And you start to realize like, people are making money off of drawing lines in the sand.
Well, we've got to do something with life, right?
Got to do something. Amazing. So what is coming up for you in January 2024? What are you looking forward to this year?
I'm looking forward to getting the funding I need for this project, which I'll show you. Fix Me. That's what it's called. So I can go shoot it and do what you did, which is travel all over the world.
Yeah. Are you going to direct it?
Yeah, I direct, show run. I mean, it's more docu than it is narrative, so it's more running.
Lot of interviews.
Yeah, interviews. Doing a lot of healing sessions, a lot of talking, and sort of a lot of the stuff we just talked about.
Are you going to put yourself through those experiences, or are you going to have third party like actors or whatever?
I'm going to put myself and my partner, who's in it. He's going to go through it too, and we'll probably have some other third parties of people because I don't want it to be conceived as something that is staged. So I want to get as much as I can. I want to get people who are willing to donate their image and likeness to this, who want to go through the experiences, who maybe have had traumatic past, who have had their problems, who have had their mental, emotional problems, to see it. But also, so I want it to be verifiable. I don't want it to be, I don't want it to be something that someone gets said, oh, they staged this.
Yeah.
And
Also, there's a lot of that.
And also, I don't want, and the reason why I want to find funding outside of the studio environment is because I don't want some director or showrunner to turn it into a reality show where it's a competition to get the most healing or whatever, like it, to me, it's not about that. To me, it's a doorway for people who have problems like I had to find a solution, to be able to look at it and say like, hey, like, oh, that worked for them. That worked for these people. Maybe I could go try that.
Sure.
Maybe I can find something because, there's a lot of people who are lost out there right now.
Yeah, I think now more than ever. I mean, it's hard to say, but I just feel like, as the world population continues to grow significantly, there's not enough resources to help everyone. And a lot of people are just falling through the cracks, man. And it's terrifying.
Well, the thing you already know intrinsically because of your life experience is the same thing I know. What the most powerful invention the world's ever had is the camera, because it's the ability to share. It's the ability to learn and educate. The internet opened up that to a much wider scope, right? Because now you can find anything, which is a little hard because, again, decision fatigue. What do you go on the internet to watch? I mean, so many people will just watch stuff that makes them laugh or, whatever. But the idea that information that can be communicated and trusted and learned, it can be shared this way. So if we want to fix our societies or our world from a emotional standpoint, from a political standpoint, it's, well, let's ask the real questions. How should we be organizing ourselves?
Yeah.
Like, what's the most important facets of that? And right now the organization is money. And like, obviously it doesn't work that well because you have big corporate companies making decisions about money. Like, just look at all the things that are happening with Boeing. Ever since that documentary was made on Netflix of once they were bought out by a finance company and they cut a good portion of the crew, all of a sudden the safety guidelines started to go out the window and then planes started crashing. And now we're still seeing it today. It's like, well, why are we making safety decisions because of finances?
Right. Yeah. Didn't like last week a Alaskan airline safety door just like fall off?
Yeah, I don't know if that was a Boeing plane though, so I can't quote that. But what I'm saying is corporate oversight because of money is a lot of reasons why things start falling through the cracks because we do things for a better stock price or, earnings for investors. And as a person who owns stocks too, I'm sort of between both worlds where I'm like, yeah, I want as an owner in things for the value of those things to go up, but I don't want to see the quality of those things go down as a result.
Especially if you're buying those services.
Right.
And especially if your life is reliant upon the safety of those services.
Go buy Boeing and then get on a plane and be like, all right, do I feel good?
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. Well, look, thank you so much for swinging by. I really appreciate the time. And what's the name of the doc you're going to try to put together?
It's called Fix Me.
Okay.
I will say it will be put together. It's my mission.
It's your work. All right. Well, I hope it comes through and best of luck for 2024. And thanks for swinging by, man.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Amazing.
Cheers. Pleasure.
Awesome.